Alright, welcome to Chapter 5, where it's all about layers inside Photoshop. Photoshop is known for its layers. In fact, everything we do inside Photoshop is going to revolve around layers. So, this is a huge chapter, and I'm going to run you through the gamut. You're going to see all kinds of neat techniques for working with your layers and managing your layers. And we're going to create for ourselves a movie poster so you can see how all of this works. So, let's get started. Okay, so we're ready to get started with layers here inside Photoshop. Now, I've opened up a couple of sample files that I'm going to be using at least in the first portion of this exercise. If you could open up statue.jpg and clouds.jpg, you'll find both of those inside the Chapter 5 folder, which is inside the Project Files folder, which you copied onto your computer when we started all of this. Alright, so I've got my files open here. I'm ready to go. The other thing that I want to do as well, this is kind of a neat thing that you can do whenever you're focusing your work on layers, is we have all kinds of extra palettes open here on the right-hand side. We don't need them. All we need is our layers palette. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Shift-Tab, and that turns off all the palettes, keeps my toolbox open over on the other side, and then I'm going to go back to the window menu and down to layers. That's the only palette that I need open inside this exercise. Okay, now take a quick look at the layers palette. You can see inside the layers palette that I have a single layer which is called background, and this little padlock here would suggest that this layer is locked down. Now, whenever you bring in a scan or a digital photo or something like that, it's always flattened. In other words, there's nothing below this guy. It's a completely flat image. And what I want to show you how to do inside this lesson anyway is how to start working with multiple layers on a basic level anyway. So what I want to do is I want to take my statue here. We'll get to the clouds in a second, but I want to take my statue here, and what I want to do is I want to remove this drab sort of gray background that the statue is sitting against, and obviously I want to put the clouds in behind them. Now, how can we do that? Well, this is a great opportunity for me to show you how to pull an object off of its background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tool that we've already seen in a previous chapter, which is our Quick Selection tool. So grab him over in the toolbox there. Don't forget, you can hit the W key on your keyboard if you like. And let's see, I'm going to make my window a little bit bigger here. Stretch this out a little bit, zoom in. There we are, something like this. Now, what I want to do, as you saw before, is I can click inside these areas. But you know what? I'm going to crank up my brush size here. Way up here. There, that's a little bit better. Single click. You saw this earlier, right? This is all old news. I want to grab this whole left side here. I'll grab that little bit right in there. I'll have to reduce down my brush size here, way down. Maybe something like that. There we go. This little spot in here, this spot up here. There we are, right in here in the wing. Pretty cool statue. Saw this outside of a cemetery, actually. Not that I frequent such places. I should mention that. Okay, things are looking good here. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. There we are. Okay, so we have the background selected. Things are looking good. Now, of course, don't forget that I can always refine my selection using this Refine Edge option. So whenever I have the Quick Selection tool turned on, I can click on Refine Edge up on the options bar here. So I'll click on this guy here. And maybe I decide that I want to further refine the edge inside this image here. What's kind of cool, by the way, when the Refine Edge dialog box is open, I can still use my keyboard shortcuts to zoom in on my image. As a matter of fact, I can even pan around inside my image here if I like. Okay, so I'm going to drop my radius all the way down. What the radius will do is improve the edge wherever there's a soft transition. Well, there's no soft transitions inside this hard-edged statue here. Same with the contrast. I'm going to make sure my contrast is dropped all the way down. What he'll do is make softer edges sharper. So I'm going to drop him right down. Smooth will smooth out a selection edge here. So I'll drop him way down. Feathering, we saw how feathering worked earlier. That's going to soften edges as well. Okay, looks good. Don't forget you can use your preview guys down here. These are just previews. That's all they are. So you can sit here and fiddle around with your settings here if you want for a second. Things are looking good though, so I'm going to click on OK. There's my selection. Now, this is what I really wanted to show you. I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see more of our image here. Okay, there we go. Now, if I hit delete on my keyboard, I'm just going to whack my delete key here. what happens is this selection is filled with white. Why white? Well, white is currently my background color. Don't forget that. We saw this earlier as well, right? Well, I don't want this area filled with white. I want to pull the statue here off of its background. So what I'm going to do is involve the layers panel now. What I'm going to do is convert this background layer to a regular old Photoshop layer. How do you do it? It's the easiest thing in the world. Just double click on this background layer. That brings up the new layer dialog box. I'll give this guy a name. Statue. I could assign a color if I wanted to, and as for mode and opacity, we'll talk about those in a little while. I'm just going to click on OK here. So now what I have here is a regular layer here. He's not a background layer. So what that means is I can now put other layers behind this layer. Okay, so I'm going to undo that step because I want to show you this one more time. All I did here on this background layer is I just double clicked. That brought me into the new layer dialog box. I gave him that name, statue. Click on OK. That's it. That's all there is to it. Now, watch what happens when I hit the delete key now. Hit the delete key, and the selection is filled with this checkerboard pattern. What's a checkerboard pattern? What's that all about? Well, in Photoshop, a checkerboard pattern represents true transparency. In other words, there's nothing there. It's not white. It's nothing. There's nothing there at all. All right, so that's how that works. And that checkerboard pattern happened because we have our layer converted to a regular layer rather than a background layer. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to deselect here. I'll just go up to the select menu and down to deselect. And let me show you a couple of neat things here before we move on. I'm going to grab my move tool from the toolbox. Now what I've done is I've taken my statue and I've pulled him right off of that drabby gray background there. So that's how that works. So with my move tool here, I can actually drag this guy around inside the image window. Okay, now how about getting those clouds into the background here? Well, I'll just move this guy out of the way a little bit, grab my clouds. What I'm going to show you here is a very common technique here in Photoshop, dropping one image inside another image, and it's really, really easy. I've got my move tool selected here inside the toolbox. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my clouds here, and I'm simply going to click and drag them over inside the statue JPEG there. As a matter of fact, my clouds here, I can just close right out of them. And there's my clouds sitting inside my statue.jpg. As a matter of fact, they're covering up my statue. Take a look at the layers palette. There's the clouds, layer 1, sitting on top of statue. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on layer 1 and give him a much more useful name. Clouds. Now, what about the stacking order of my layers? Well, I want the clouds to be behind the statue, obviously. So I'm just going to grab clouds anywhere along here, just click and pull them straight down in the layers palette. That drops the clouds layer behind the statue, and you can see the result inside my image window. Okay, now I can move my clouds around if I want to, but I'm going to grab my free transform. Remember your free transform? I'm going to go up to my edit menu and down to free transform. And I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to scale out my clouds here so they're covering up the entire background, something like that. Great. Move this guy over just a little bit, something like that. Don't forget, you can use your arrow keys on your keyboard if you want to nudge objects around, in this case my clouds. Hit Enter to lock it in. Perfect. Looking great.